Hello? Hello? Hi. Hi. I think I've got everything going here. You can hear the music, you can hear me. Yeah, I just realized that. My mother and I are texting about tickets for a ballet, so trying to figure that out. Did I lose chat? Or did everybody leave? 50? Yeah, good luck with that. We're gonna have nosebleed seats if you're going for 50. Ballet tickets are excellent. Yes, but for some reason this production in particular is pretty expensive. So I'm not too thrilled about that. So, yes. Okay, hello. Hi Terry, hi Riddy, hi CJ. Welcome for joining. I don't know if anybody else is going to be joining us, so I don't know if I should wait to... Oh. I should put those in a different place. Wait to make my announcement, but I brought my birthday flowers in for ambiance. I don't know. That's still too high. Okay, well, you can see part of them. I don't really have anywhere else to put them. Can you see back here? It's kind of out of frame. What about that? Can you see that? Yeah, okay. $80, yeah. It's a little bit, it's usually around 50, 60 here for okay seats, but this year, or this production is a little bit more expensive, and I think that's because it's Alice in Wonderland, and there's puppets, and original scoring, and I think it's just, it costs more for this production, so... Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, those are my birthday flowers, so I thought they'd be nice to include in the stream just for, you know, just to be pretty. The audience they can cater to can afford to spend a ridiculous amount of money. Yeah. Not always, but they're nice where they are. Oh, sorry, Terry, I may have moved them after you said that, but I think there you can see it a lot better, although the lighting is really weird in here. I'm gonna have to mess with that when I get more like serious about having a streaming schedule and everything, so I can make things look better, but this room is still not, I mean, we have not gotten to this room yet, so I don't know what's gonna happen, when it's going to happen. Might be a bit quiet because I'm getting last stuff together before I leave. Okay. I don't belong here. Just try to... What? What kind of production, Terry? Just get sweet dimmer switches? Yeah. Yeah, that's what I need. We have dimmer stuff in the living room. Actually, this is the only ceiling fan in our house that doesn't have a remote control, which is... It would be cool if it did, and then we could dim it, but yeah, I don't know. Oh, you're going to TwitchCon, that's right. So, are you leaving for the airport? Is that what you're talking about? A bit nerve-wracking? Why? It's gonna be so fun. I need pictures, not that you're gonna share them with us, but pictures or it never happened. in a couple hours. Cool. Lots of people she doesn't know. Yeah, but she knows us. I mean, now, like, I guess I used to be nervous, but I've met a few people that I've known online, like, within the last couple years, and I don't know, I'm not really nervous about it anymore, because I feel like you guys are my friends, and I know you, and, I mean, yeah, I might get nervous, like, at the last second, but I don't know, like, I don't think it's gonna be a big deal. Rolls eyes. Yeah, they would break the cameras because you're so beautiful, Riddy. That's what would happen. I've never met people I've only known from the internet before. Yeah, that's fair. I've met 1, 2, 3. At least 3? Nods head. Hey, everybody, nod your head with me because you know it's true. Riddy's just too beautiful. She'll break the freaking camera with her beauty. She'll blind the camera. I think 3. Salad is included in that. I think I was nervous about that one. Nods head extra. Too beautiful. Yeah, I don't know. It's become like a somewhat normal thing for me now. Is that weird? Is that weird to say? I don't know. Nervous because he might hover over you? Because he's so tall? Well, I don't know. Who, what? Salad. We're talking about Salad. When we met Salad. Are you guys ready for my announcement? Should I make it? Ready? And then also, I don't really remember, he a tall boy, yes, that's true. I don't really remember where we are in the book. Hello, ex-Peggy, is that how you say it? Hi, how are you? Welcome for joining. Announcement hype. I don't know why I'm just hugging the book with my face. Because I want to, and it blocks off my acne. Riddy, would you like to, Well, I don't know, Sketchers, are you protesting, or are you... I don't know what your point is, really, but... I don't really know what to say to that, except... Can we discuss? That's not really what this stream is about, so... I don't really want to have a discussion right now, because I'm about to make an important announcement about my life, and, yeah. It's just not, that's not what this stream is about, so, Okay, Riddy, yeah, you might want to do your thing. It's because I put the tag on there for LGBTQ. I guess I should have anticipated that, but thank you, Riddy. Yeah, it's not the time or place. Because it's just not, it's important to me, but it's not relevant right now because that's not what my stream is, so, yeah. Okay, anyways, moving on, excited for announcement, and I hope you feel great about yourselves, guys. So, you all know that Keegan had, a brain tumor, and it was benign, but during the surgery, they didn't get it all out. So it still has residual So he technically still has a tumor in his head. So it's been 6 months, exactly 6 months since he had his surgery, and we went to the doctor, and it's all clear. There's no activity on it. The only changes were from the operation, so he can drive again, and yeah, it's just the next checkup will be in a year, and then if everything's good, it'll be like every 2 years after that, which I wasn't anticipating because it was supposed to be an annual thing, but yeah, every time we've seen the doctor, he's been just like so nonchalant and like unconcerned about everything. So yeah, it's good news. Okay, CJ, I'll have to read your message in a second. Yeah, thank you guys. I just wanted to share it with you. I should probably post something in Discord just to let everybody know, like people that are TwitchCon and everything who can't be here, and I hope they get to stream from TwitchCon, although I probably won't get to watch because this weekend is really nuts. Tomorrow night's Keegan's high school reunion, 10th year reunion, and he's really stressed about that, and I'm going with him, so he was the class president, so he has to like organize things, but and then of course Saturday's rehearsal, Sunday's rehearsal, and Keegan is actually going to be in the Nutcracker with me. Yeah, he's going to be my husband during the party scene, so yeah, it's just a busy weekend, and then maybe also seeing Alice in Wonderland on Saturday night, so lots of things going on. I meant to put this, meant to put this over here. I always knew he was a party dad. That's right. That is right. I don't even know what the choreography is going to be for that because it's going to be like very minimal, so I have no clue if they'll get to stream from TwitchCon. I know nothing about scheduling for it, what they plan to do, or anything really. Rob suggested like 40,000 things to do at TwitchCon. Rob's going, right? Yeah. I couldn't remember who else is going. I know V, N, Riddy, Rob. Is there anybody else that I'm missing? That's exciting though. I hope you guys have fun. Holland, okay. Oxel. I wondered if Oxel was going. That's so fun! They need to take lots of pictures. They're all together right now? Oh, that's so cool. Well, they've all met, right? So it's not like super new for them, but yeah, that's really fun. I wish I could go, it's just like super busy and also don't have time or money. That makes sense, they traveled together, yeah. Don't have time or money to go to California, so it's a bit of a ways for me. Yeah, V, Holland, and Rob traveled together. That would make sense. Because they all live nearby. So, do you guys remember the last thing that happened in the book? Because don't mind me, I can't read very well right now. What do you mean? Oh, hi, Salad! Welcome for joining. Yeah, you just missed it, but I will say it again. Time and money and other factors. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I don't mind repeating it. So the good news is that Keegan's tumor is not active. So we had our 6-month checkup today, and he's good. He can drive again, and yeah, we have our next checkup in 1 year. So everything's good. That's the news. That's the good news. And welcome for joining. Is still excited the second time. Nice, great. Yeah. How are all of you doing? Like, I don't know if I asked that at the beginning, so how are you guys? You don't do greed streams? Okay. Well, thanks for stopping in. My arm just spasmed? What? Twitch? Aha! TwitchCon. Aha! I get it. What? I'm a punk? What, Salad? You weren't joking. No, I know you weren't joking. I get it. Like, is your arm okay, or are you're just twitching? No, I know, CJ. I know what you mean. We love you too, Salad. You don't have to be a punk somewhere else. You can be a punk in the stream or wherever you want. But I don't understand why you're saying you're a punk. Is your arm okay, CJ? Do we need... I'm just cold, I think. It made my arm twitch. Okay. Put on a sweater or something. Or get a blanket, because that's what I'm doing. So the last chapter where we left off, Nancy was talking to Joe Swinson about the diary, and Joe writes... Okay, they don't know about Mr. Raybolt. Joe and Raybolt had an appointment. And Joe, his money, his letters with his money have been intercepted that he was sending to his wife for them to live, her and Honey. And so his letters have been stolen. Joe claims that Felix Raybolt cheated him out of his patents. And Joe lost a diary, and it was written in Swedish. The diary contains things Felix Raybolt wishes were not written down. And he lost a ring. And so at the end, Joe goes back to work and George and Nancy go back to the car, but then at the very end of the chapter, to leave off on a cliffhanger, somebody grabbed Nancy. So that's where we left off. I'm afraid I might get pumpkin all over my sweater, so I'm wearing some older clothes and no sweater. Oh. Oh. That's a valid concern. Where are you doing the pumpkin gutting? Are you outside? Or, I don't know. Where are you? Man, I'm just a mess. My hair looks crazy and everything. Our dining room table. Why are you cold? Turn up the heat. Easy to clean off. Or get I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. This is very exciting though. Pumpkining is very exciting. Oh, did we decide, we should talk about this later, but did we decide on the kanji, the Chinese characters? New York sucks. Sorry. That we're gonna put, because I think literally fire dragon or fiery dragon will be fine. But let me know if I need, you need me to send that to you. To confirm. that's what we're doing. So, okay. So I'm going... Yeah, none of that. I'm going to start off with chapter 13. And we're just going to forget that happened because in no situation is that ever okay. So, yeah. Okay, chapter 13 is called The Law Takes Over. We didn't decide yet because I'm not sure if we will need it or not. Oh, okay. Yeah, at the very end. Okay. That sounds good. Ugh, I should have anticipated trolls. But... No, that's okay, Rudy. That's okay. I forget that I can do it myself because I just have it like right here, so it's not hard to do. Nah, it's okay. They didn't really give you any reason to just ban them outright, but now they have, so we don't need to deal with that anymore. And I keep forgetting that I have apple cider here. Because I wanted something warm, but I also still have my tea from Sonic, so. People are just stupid, honestly. Okay, anyways, let's get back to the book. Riddy, your pumpkin's amazing, by the way. I didn't realize we would be competing with you. So we have some serious competition. Okay, the law takes over. Let go of me, Nancy cried out and tried to shake off the man's iron grip. When she did not succeed, Bess and George started pounding the man and forced him to release Nancy's arm. What do you want? Nancy demanded indignantly. Some information. Why are you snooping around here? The stranger snarled. Are you a factory guard? Nancy countered, knowing from his clothes and manner that he most certainly was not. Why, yes, that's what I am. And I got a right to know why you've been talking to that workman. The conversation was private, Nancy told the man firmly. Now, if you'll just move. For a moment, the obnoxious stranger did not seem inclined to do so, but finally he strode off down the street. The girls stepped into the car and drove away. Nancy, aren't you worried? Bess asked. That man was positively horrible. Sounds familiar. Yes, I am, Bess, because I'm more certain than ever that Joe Swenson is in some kind of jam. If we can see him at 4 o'clock, I'm going to ask him about that crude person, declared George. Say, Nancy, where are you going now? Yes, where? Bess echoed. I'm starving. Of course you're starving, Bess. Nancy laughed. I could use some lunch myself. After that, I'll introduce myself to Phil Roberts' father. The Stanford postmaster, Bess exclaimed. Nancy, you're not transferring your affections from Ned to Phil already. Nothing like that, Nancy assured her with a grin. I have a little scheme I'd like to try out, and I need his cooperation. Nancy stopped speaking as she drove into a public parking lot next to a tea room. Excuse me. The girls went inside and were fortunate to be seated at the last available table. It was such a noisy place that the girls did not try to talk. Half an hour later, they came out of the tea room, glad to breathe the fresh air and escape the din. I wish we still had tea rooms. Since the post office was close by, the girls walked there. Seeing a door sign marked Private, Postmaster, Nancy went to it and knocked. Presently, it was opened by a pleasant, middle-aged man. I'm Nancy Drew from River Heights, she said, smiling. I met your son Phil at a party. Oh yes, Phil told me. Won't you come in? After the girls had entered and the door had been closed, Nancy introduced her friends. I've come on an unusual errand, Mr. Roberts, Nancy said. A man I know who works at Stanford Electronics has sent 2 letters containing money orders from here. Neither has been received. Probably all your employees are above suspicion, but would you mind if I make a little experiment? The postmaster smiled. What kind of experiment? I'll mail a note to the man's wife with a money order in it from your office, Nancy explained. Could you possibly find out if that letter is sent out from here? Mr. Roberts looked intently at Nancy. You're a very ingenious young lady, he remarked. And if the letter does leave here, then you'll check with the receiving post office to find out if it has reached there? Yes. The family of this man is desperately in need of receiving money from him. I'm trying to help them. And I'll help too, the postmaster said suddenly. Now, will you please give me the name and address of this woman? Nancy took Joe Swenson's unsealed envelope from her purse, and Mr. Roberts copied the 2 names and addresses on it. As he handed it back, he said, Mail this at once. Then he added, If you come back in a couple of hours, I'll have a report for you, after I personally examine all the outgoing mail bags. I'll be here. Nancy thanked the postmaster, and the 3 girls went into the main lobby. I really don't think you could do that these days. You'd need a warrant or something to do something like that. You couldn't just walk in and be like, I need to help somebody, will you help me? I don't know why I did that accent, that was weird. Okay, anyways. There, Nancy bought the $25 money order, kept the purchaser's receipt, and tucked the other section, properly filled out, into the letter. Then she sealed the envelope and slipped the letter into the nearby slot. When the girls reached the street, Beth said, That was a daring thing to do, Nancy. Suppose the letter is intercepted, and the money order cashed by some unscrupulous person. If that happens, I'll make good on the money. Right now, tell me, where are we going to spend 2 hours? George suggested attending a movie across the street, and the girls went into the theater. They became so interested in the historical mystery film that the time flew by. The feature ended just as the 2 hours were up, and the girls hurried back to Mr. Roberts' office. Again he opened the door. The postmaster was not alone. A policeman stood guarding a man who sat dejectedly in a chair, his face in his hands. He looked up at Nancy, hate blazing in his eyes. The money order clerk. Nancy Drew, thank you for leading us to this thief, the postmaster said. Ralph Ringman has confessed to taking not only the letter you mailed, but all money orders of any size. He has 2 accomplices, a man and a woman, who go to various towns and cash the money orders. I'm not the only employee in on this deal, Ringman cried out. Mr. Roberts smiled. I figured that might be the case, and have notified other postmasters who have had complaints of undelivered money orders to try the same ruse that Nancy Drew suggested. At that moment, the phone rang. Mr. Roberts answered it. Yes, Clyde. You did? Good. I guess that little racket is over with. When he hung up, Mr. Roberts reported to the others that Ringman's outside accomplices had just been arrested by the police and had confessed their parts in the scheme. Thank you for the host, Summer. On a hunch, Nancy told about the rough-looking man who had questioned her. Was he in league with Ralph Ringman? She asked the postmaster. That's right. Mr. Roberts turned to the prisoner. You'll be interested to hear that your pal meant to double-cross you. He planned to hold up Swenson at the plant and grab Swenson's money for himself. Just as he was about to emerge from his hiding place in the shrubbery nearby, Miss Drew and her friends came along. When he overheard the conversation about the stolen mail, he got panicky. That's why he followed Miss Drew and accused her of snooping. The low-down sneak, snarled Ringman. I think he'd be saying something a lot worse. Here's an illustration. It says, Nancy Drew, thank you for leading us to this thief, said the postmaster. It's a cute picture. I like it. Mr. Roberts said that a man from the Postal Inspector's Division would take custody of the prisoner. By the way, he said to Nancy, do you still want Mr. Swenson's letter sent? Yes, if it's safe. I'll give the money order receipt to him. Nancy glanced at her watch. We must hurry, she said. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Please give my regards to Phil. The girls hurried off. At a traffic light, they paused, waiting for it to turn green. Behind them stood 2 men conversing in low voices. Where'd you get the tip? One asked. From Raybolt's wife. She said the man who set fire to the house had an appointment with him there that evening. I heard he ran away. Where'd he go? Nobody knows, but we tracked him here. He's working at the electronics factory under an assumed name. What is it? We don't know, but we have the man's description. We'll have him in jail by tonight. Nancy, Bess, and George hardly breathed during this recital. Did these men mean Joe Swenson? Ooh, welcome for shouting out. Okay, so I guess the girls were walking and they came up behind dudes that were talking about possibly Joe. Anyways, end of chapter 13. I'm not sure if I can keep the Twitch stream running on my phone, but I might try to do that or just stop in every once in a while because I really want to get started while I don't have a headache and I'm not tired, because that is never. That's okay, CJ. Sorry for competing. Thank you, Riddy, and I love the competition. You're good, Riddy. We really liked your pumpkin. And, yeah, welcome for carving. Go for it while you still feel good about it. You have all con to carve while I'm unable to carve a response. That was a great accent. I don't even know what it was. Is on his phone now? What do you mean, CJ? Do whatever you need to do. I thank you for being here while you can. Yay for summer hosts. That's right. Thank you for clapping. He's working under assumed name. What is it? We don't know. We're just assuming it's Steve. It's always Steve. Hi, Summer. Good to see you. I'm watching on my phone. Okay. Okay. It's always Steve. It's true. It's very true. How are you, Summer? Oh, did you hear the good news? Should I repeat the good news again? I'm happy to repeat. Man, this book smells. I'm gonna have to baking soda these, probably. CJ, do you have something warm to drink? Maybe that's your solution for not being cold. Get some cider or something. Anyways, Summer, if you didn't hear, the good news is that Keegan's tumor is not active. So we had our 6-month checkup today, and we got the all clear. So, yeah, it's good for the next year until we get it checked on again. So, so it's very good news. Okay, I will continue on chapter 14. And arrest. The traffic light turned green and the 3 girls began to cross the street. Nancy made a point of staying in front of the 2 men who had said they were going to see that someone, presumably Joe Swenson, was arrested. Who are these men, she wondered. Detectives? Or are they in the employ of Raybould? If Mr. Swenson is innocent, he mustn't be sent to jail. Nancy immediately made up her mind what she would do. Meet Honey's father if possible, show him the diary, and ask him to translate some of it. Excuse me. Then I'll decide what to do next, and whether or not to warn Mr. Swenson of his possibly being arrested. He and his family shouldn't have to suffer such disgrace if it's unwarranted. When the girls reached the opposite curb, Nancy took her friend's arms and whispered, "Come on, hurry, we have work to do." They ran to Nancy's car. Nancy handed the keys to George. "Will you drive so I'll be free to hop out and get hold of Mr. Swenson the instant he comes to the gate?" George took the wheel, and they made record time to the factory. She parked in the first space beyond the front of the gate and left the engine running. "You girls watch for those men we overheard. I'll look for Joe Swenson," Nancy directed. As she spoke, the 4 o'clock whistle blew. "He'll be out any minute now," George exclaimed. Anxiously, the girls scanned the faces of the workmen as they came from the building. "Where is he?" Bess fretted. At that moment, Nancy caught sight of the inventor. She alighted and called his name. With a smile of friendly recognition, he came over to the car. "Jump in," Nancy invited, indicating the rear seat. "We'll give you a lift." "Why, thanks," the inventor returned gratefully. "I live on the south side. Another fellow and I share a room at the outskirts of town. I imagine it's out of your way." "Not at all," Nancy assured him with a worried glance up and down the street. In her haste to leave the plant area, Nancy climbed in and almost pulled the man in after her. She asked George to press the button to roll up the convertible's top. "A man certainly appreciates a ride home after a hard day on his feet," Swenson remarked, leaning back against the cushion. "I'm not yet accustomed to standing 8 hours, but I'll be all right in a week or so. I'm glad to earn a little money by any means, after being out of work for so long." As George drove down the street, Nancy said, "Mr. Swenson, the mystery about your lost letters has been solved." Quickly, she explained about the mail clerk who had been arrested. The inventor was shocked and shook his head sadly. "I'm glad he's been caught, but what an unfortunate thing for him to do. He probably has a family. They'll have to suffer with him. Crimes, big or little, are so useless. Whatever profits they may bring are always temporary." Nancy nodded. She was becoming more convinced every minute that Joe Swenson was an honest person. "I have another surprise," she said. "Your diary was picked up near the drive to the Raybolt house." She took the journal from her handbag. "Would you mind translating some of the Swedish for me?" "My diary! Oh, how lucky!" Almost affectionately, he began to turn the pages. "Here's an item about Honey's birthday. How she loved the little toy I made for her. I was always planning to try to market those mechanical dolls, but I never got to it." George interrupted to ask which direction to take, and Nancy said, "Oh, let's just ride out into the country." She wanted to elude the men who intended to arrest Mr. Swenson until she could make up her mind what to do. Suddenly, the inventor's face darkened. "Here's a note about Felix Raybolt," he translated. "I have been warned by my friend Anson Heilberg not to let Raybolt see my invention, but I shall take a chance. I must because I need money for rent and food. He will give me an advance." Mr. Swenson remarked bitterly, "How I wish I had listened to Anson. Felix Raybolt would not give me another cent, or any part of a royalty from the use of my electrochemical process for putting a ceramic finish on steel." How terribly unfair!" Bess cried out, and the other girls expressed the same opinion. Nancy then told the inventor that a friend of hers had found the signet ring. "I'll see that it is returned to you," Nancy assured him. "Well, that is good news," said Mr. Swenson. Nancy gradually switched the conversation to the Raybolt fire and said, "The investigators report that the explosions in the house could have been caused by a freak accident. A television set not working properly, a defective electronic heating device setting off some kind of explosive stored in the cellar. Mr. Swenson, have you any idea what really happened to the Raybolts?" Mr. Swenson looked at Nancy searchingly. "My answer might explain a good many angles to the case," he said slowly. "As you probably know, it's against the law to store explosives without a permit. I believe Felix Raybolt was breaking that law. He probably was in the house waiting for me and accidentally caused the explosion himself." "But they found no evidence of a body," Bess spoke up with a shudder. "Mr. Raybolt undoubtedly escaped, and then disappeared knowing he would be arrested," the inventor said vehemently. "But you didn't see him run out?" Nancy queried. "No." "We should have looked for footprints, but I guess it's too late now," Nancy remarked. "Oh, why didn't we think of that?" Bess murmured. She had turned around to watch out the rear window for any pursuers. Suddenly she gasped, "Police!" George had just passed a side road. From it shot a car with 2 state troopers. When it turned in their direction, George said grimly, "I hope they're not after us." All the occupants of the convertible grew tense, but Nancy said, "Just keep going at the same speed. Let's not act guilty." By this time, she was convinced of Mr. Swenson's innocence, and hoped fervently that the officers were not pursuing her car. Nancy doubted they would take her word about the truth of the inventor's story. "Maybe they're after someone else, for speeding," Bess said, though without conviction. Nancy stole a glance out the rear window. Her spirits sank. The state police car was gaining on them, but not look as though it was going to pass the convertible. An uneasy thought crossed Nancy's mind. If those troopers are after Joe Swenson, then George, Bess, and I might be arrested for aiding a suspected criminal to escape. George was forced to slow down for a sharp curve. Directly behind it, 2 men were driving a small herd of cattle across the highway. "What luck!" George cried, slowing down. She honked her horn and tried to edge through, but only succeeded in frightening the cows so they stood motionless. The convertible came to a halt. Behind it, the police car drew nearer. Nancy had a sudden impulse to tell Joe Swenson to duck down out of sight, then checked herself. Such an action would indeed make the officers suspicious. Instead, she slipped the diary into her handbag. Nancy glanced at her companion. Mr. Swenson's face was grim. The police car pulled up alongside the convertible. Nancy's heart was in her throat, but she tried not to show any agitation. The 2 herdsmen had headed the cows off to the side of the road. Affecting nonchalance, George started to drive off, but a shout from the trooper's car stopped her. "Hold on!" one of the officers cried out. "Pull over!" "They were following us," Bess groaned. Quickly, Nancy whispered to Joe Swenson, "Don't worry, we'll stick by you." The officers had jumped out. They strode up to the convertible. "We've had a call to pick up this car," said one, while the other thrust his face through the open rear door window and peered intently at Mr. Swenson. "This is the man," he declared. "What do you mean?" Nancy demanded coolly, with as much conviction as she could muster. "Are you Joe Swenson?" the trooper barked, ignoring Nancy's question. "Yes." "You were wanted by the Mapleton police for deliberately setting the Rabel house on fire." At this accusation, the girls gasped, and Joe Swenson blanched. Then a flush of anger mounted to his cheeks. "What nonsense is this? You haven't a shred of proof. I don't know anything about the fire. You have the wrong man." "Well, you can explain that at headquarters. You'll have to come along with us. The less trouble you make, the better it'll go for you." One of the troopers slipped a pair of handcuffs from his pocket. Joe Swenson shrank back. "Don't put them on, please. I'll come without any trouble." "Okay, but don't try any funny stunts. Climb out and be quick about it." "Just a minute, officer," Nancy interposed. "Aren't you making a mistake? I feel sure Mr. Swenson isn't the man you're after. Please let him go free. I'll be responsible for his appearance in court." Joe Swenson added, "I started working at Baylor Weston's factory just recently. I don't mind answering your questions, but if I'm detained in jail, I'll lose my job." Protest was useless. Joe Swenson gave Nancy a courageous, apologetic smile and alighted. "You girls will have to come along too," the officer announced. "Drive on ahead and not too fast. You have some explaining to do too. Don't try to get away." Oh, that was the end of the chapter. Okay. I feel like that was different than how it would go today. They definitely wouldn't have not had him in handcuffs. And they probably would have arrested all of them, like, right on the spot, I would think. I'm doing okay. This pumpkin guts smell is keeping me alert. Is that not a good smell? How to pretend you're not a criminal. Committing crimes is such a bad idea. I hate crime. Don't you hate crime? Very different. I love V's emote. It's so cute. It really works with reading Nancy Drew, obviously. Also, that if they just got far enough ahead of the police, they would escape, right? It's very different. Okay. Chapter 15. Be right back to wash my pumpkin. Okay. Sounds good. Nancy is accused. Uh-oh. This is an outrage, Bess gasped. You mean we actually must go to police headquarters? I'm sorry I involved you girls in this, Joe Swenson murmured. He turned pleadingly to the officers. It wasn't their fault. They merely offered me a ride. They'll all have to come to headquarters for questioning, the officer insisted. Mr. Swenson was escorted to the state police car. Before the troopers started off, they again cautioned George to drive ahead slowly. For 2 cents, I would step on the gas and try to get away, she fumed to her companions. I wouldn't advise it, Bess said uneasily. We're in enough trouble now. Oh, Bess, I was only kidding, George retorted. The 3 girls fell into gloomy silence. The prospect of unpleasant notoriety for their families was anything but reassuring. The friends were glad that at least they had been permitted to drive a short way ahead of the police car, for their entry into Mapleton attracted less attention than would otherwise have been the case. When they reached headquarters and parked, Nancy warned, "Whatever happens, don't say anything that will incriminate Joe Swenson." Okay, so Nancy's encouraging them to lie. Outside the building, the girls were confronted by the 2 men they had overheard talking in Stanford. "This is our man, all right," one of them said as the trooper's car bearing Joe Swenson pulled up. The inventor was hustled out and into the custody of the men. "Trying to help Swenson make a getaway, eh?" the other of the pair accused the girls. "Come along, you 3. "Plainclothes detectives," Nancy murmured. As they went up the steps, George teased, "What would Ned Nickerson think if he could see his Nancy now?" "If it comes to the worst, we can call on him," Nancy smiled. "Before we're through, you may be glad he's my friend." Inside headquarters, the situation lost all suggestion of humor. Here, Nancy and her friends were told by Police Captain Johnson that the detectives had learned at the plant of Joe Swenson's departure in a car bearing Nancy's license number. He made no reference to the detective's source of information. To the girls' dismay, the inventor was booked on a charge of arson. No charge was placed against them, but the girls were asked a great many questions, and their names and addresses were written down. When Nancy gave hers, significant looks were exchanged among the captain and the detectives, Dabble and Rock. After that, the girls were treated less peremptorily. Peremptorily? I don't actually know how to pronounce that, because I think it's pronounced differently than it's spelled. Anyways. But if they had hoped that the name of Drew would release them at once, Nancy and the cousins were disappointed. They were informed that they must submit to further questioning. George and Bess were thoroughly frightened, and Joe Swenson had become so agitated that he could not speak in a normal tone of voice. Nancy realized that he was in no condition to defend himself. The 4 were given chairs opposite the 2 stern-faced detectives and their captain. One could have heard a pin drop, the room became so quiet. The officers stared fixedly at Joe Swenson, who squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. Suddenly, Detective Dabble pointed an accusing finger, and his voice rasped out so sharply that Nancy jumped. "Swenson, when did you first plot the death of Felix Raybould?" "When did I don't know what you mean," Mr. Swenson stammered. The keen glance of his questioner did not waver. "You know well enough what I mean. It won't do you any good to try to lie. You were seen near the Raybould estate on the day of the fire." "Who says I was there?" Swenson demanded. "You're accusing me because you can't find the real criminal." His shot went home, for the detective blinked, briefly nonplussed. But he went on. "You were seen by the railroad station agent, and as soon as he identifies you, we'll have you behind bars. Now out with your story. It'll go easier for you if you make a complete confession." "There's nothing to confess," Swenson returned bitterly. "I did go to the Raybould estate." Nancy's heart began to pound. Was the inventor going to confess something he had not told her? "So," his questioner cried triumphantly, "then you admit going to the house." "I've admitted nothing damaging," Swenson retorted hotly. "I went to the house because I had an appointment with Felix Raybould." Nancy was sure now that Swenson intended to make a clean breast of everything, and while admiring his honesty, she realized that he was apt to make his case appear worse than it might be. She longed to warn him to remain silent until he could consult a lawyer. Bess and George sat transfixed. "So you had an appointment with Raybould, eh?" Detective Rock took up the questioning. "What kind of appointment?" "He had a patent of mine, and I wanted him to make a settlement." "Raybould owed you money?" Yes, he stole my invention. I wanted either the money or my drawings back. What did Raybould say? I never saw him. There were no lights in the house. He didn't answer the bell. Then there was an explosion, and I ran away. You knew he was in the house, and you didn't try to save him? The captain interjected. I don't believe he was in the house. When did you last see Raybould? In a restaurant here in town. I see, Detective Davil observed with satisfaction. You had an argument, didn't you? Yes, Swenson admitted unwillingly. We did have hot words. Which ended in a threat from you, the officer concluded. Joe Swenson shook his head vehemently. No, I swear it. I'll tell you everything, right from the very beginning. Raybould seemed uneasy, as though he were afraid I'd attempt physical violence. He had a guilty conscience, all right. You argued about the invention? Yes. He admitted he had deliberately stolen my ideas, but he defied me to prove anything. That made me angry. You threatened him? I told him I would take the matter to court. Of course I didn't have any money to engage a lawyer, but my bluff frightened Raybould, and he told me to come to the house where we could talk privately. What do you think caused the fire? The captain asked. The explosion, which nearly knocked me off my feet. I was sort of dazed for several minutes. What happened next? It came over me that if I were found near the place, I might be accused of causing the fire. When I heard a car coming up the driveway, I decided to make a getaway. I scrambled through the hedge and ran into the woods. You're sure you didn't leave Raybould inside on purpose? Detective Rock asked. 1,000 times no! Mr. Swenson cried out indignantly. I hated that man, I'll admit, but I didn't plot his death. Why didn't you tell your story right away? I was afraid it would be misinterpreted. I had no idea Raybould was missing until I read it in the newspaper. The three officials took turns questioning Swenson. They quizzed him about details and times, but were unable to confuse him. Nancy was certain that the inventor's account was true, yet she had to acknowledge that the story sounded somewhat implausible. The fact remained that Felix Raybould was missing, and that Joe Swenson was the last person known to have an appointment with him. Nevertheless, the inventor's straightforward manner had impressed the officers, and Nancy thought they were on the verge of letting him go. Felix Raybould had been generally disliked, and it was common knowledge that he had made his fortune by ruthlessly adopting the ideas of various inventors. Oh my goodness! Thank you for those bits, Black Rose. I'll be right with you. The three officials held a whispered conference, then began questioning Nancy and her friends. The girls told no more than was necessary, with Nancy stressing the story of the inventor's lost letters and the thieving mail clerk. She put in a good word for Mr. Swenson at every opportunity, and it was apparent that she was creating a favorable impression. The unpleasant session was drawing to a close, with every prospect of vindication for Joe Swenson, when there was a knock at the door. An officer entered, addressing himself to his superior. Mrs. Raybould is here now. Shall I send her in? As an affirmative answer was given, Nancy exchanged despairing glances with her friends. She sensed that since Mrs. Raybould had set the detectives on Joe Swenson's trail, the woman would create a scene. I'm sure she'll do all in her power to damage his case, Nancy thought. Her premonition was correct. Mrs. Raybould's very appearance aroused the sympathy of the officials. The woman evidently had worried herself into a state bordering on nervous collapse, and the sight of Joe Swenson made her distraught. Can you identify him? The police captain asked. Mrs. Raybould stopped sobbing long enough to take her first good look at the prisoner. Nancy, who was watching her closely, saw uncertainty flash over her face. The young detective was convinced the woman had never seen Mr. Swenson before in her life. Mrs. Raybould hesitated only an instant, then cried hysterically, Yes, I'm sure this is the man my husband went to meet. Felix feared him. He is a heartless criminal who deliberately burned my home and plotted my husband's death. She burst into tears again, and an officer led her from the room. However, the damage had been done. If the three officials had ever seriously considered freeing Swenson, the decision was instantly changed. You girls are free to go, the captain told Nancy and her friends. If we need you again, we'll summon you. What about Mr. Swenson? Nancy inquired hopefully. We'll have to lock him up. Sorry if he's a friend of yours. His story may be on the level, but he'll have to prove it. Thank you for the bits. Oh, you have mobile now. Thank you for the bits, Riddy. Oh my goodness. There was nothing more to be said. Joe Swenson thanked Nancy for her interest in the case. You're the only real friend I have, he said unhappily. I've told them the truth, but they won't believe me. If you only had a witness, Nancy murmured. Someone who saw you at the door. No one was around, Mr. Swenson returned gloomily. The place was deserted. Don't give up hope, Nancy said encouragingly. I'll find a lawyer for you, and I'll bring your wife and Honey to see you too. The conversation was abruptly cut short as an officer took the prisoner by the arm and led him away. When they entered the outside room, Nancy and her friends found Mrs. Raybolt slumped on a bench, sobbing. Nancy, provoked that the woman had testified unfairly against Joe Swenson, started to pass her without a word. Then pity surmounted indignation, and she paused. Don't grieve about your husband, Nancy pleaded. He'll be found alive. I feel confident of it. Mrs. Raybolt wiped her eyes and stood up. She glared at Nancy with an almost insane look in her eyes. You dare to tell me that? Thank you, Riddy. You dare to tell me that, she cried out. You're an accomplice of Joe Swenson. My husband is gone. You probably helped plot his death. Mrs. Raybolt slapped Nancy's face, then began to shake the girl by her shoulders. Captain, she screamed, come here. I demand that you arrest this accomplice. It's getting violent. That's the end of chapter 15. Thank you guys for the bits. Good thing CJ isn't here for the Ned talk. If anything happened to your pumpkin, it was Ned. Okay, I'm sorry, Black Rose. Tell me if I remember your name. Is your name Joni? Is that correct? I'm sorry if I'm wrong, or if I forgot. I just haven't seen you in a while, but welcome for being here. Thank you for being here. It's good to see you. How are you doing? Doing good. Okay, good. Bit hype. Whoop whoop. Riddy, have you ever watched a video and got 2 bits? The only way I can get bits. I've never been able to get bits from ads. Ever. I don't know why that is. Pretend I can spell. Welcome for clapping. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know what's up with this book. It's getting violent. Some Nancy Drew shenanigans up in here. Ugh! Ugh! Yes. Okay, so I was right. Good, I didn't forget. They cut me off from normal ads because I was getting too many. I've never gotten any. I've never had the opportunity to watch ads for bits. Nancy Drew shenanigans, that's right. I smell my flowers. I guess I should be looking that way. That. Nancy Slap-anigans. There's a timing sweet spot. You have not either. Okay. So it's not just me. Branigans? What is happening right now? I don't know why I'm so tired. Try around midnight? Oh. Reference I get, but I don't think anybody else would get. Kiff explained it. I have no idea what you're talking about, but that's okay. I didn't know it had anything to do with timing. That's interesting. Yeah, my hair is crap right now. I kind of want to fix it, but... Futurama. Oh, I've never seen Futurama. Okay. I have never seen it. Don't mind me, my hair is gross. This is probably not going to be any better, but that's alright. Okay. Pretty sure nothing is gross about Paige ever. Whatever. Well, you guys are biased or blind or something. I don't know. Thanks for saying that, but you're crazy. You're all crazy. Okay. Alright, let's continue. I perhaps foolishly cut my hair recently before going to this thing. Oh! Well, did you like tell them what to look for in terms of description? Y'all crazy. Okay, chapter 16, A New Assignment. Shocked by Mrs. Raybult's angry outbursts, Nancy stepped back to dodge the blows. Bess and George had jumped forward to her defense, but just then, a sergeant burst into the room and interceded. Mrs. Raybult stopped fighting with her fists, but not with her tongue. "I demand the arrest of this girl. She's in league with Joe Swenson and helped to kill my husband," she screamed. At this point, Captain Johnson appeared. "Mrs. Raybult," he said sternly, "the law will handle this case. I advise you to calm down, or you may find yourself in a hospital under the care of a psychiatrist." The distraught woman started to reply to this, but apparently thought better of it. Nancy said calmly, "Mrs. Raybult, I don't blame you for being upset, but please try to believe that people are trying to help find your husband. The fire investigators are sure no one was in your home at the time of the explosion and fire. Therefore, Mr. Raybult must be alive." "Then where is he?" Mrs. Raybult demanded. "No one knows." Nancy looked directly at the woman. "Unless you do," she added disarmingly. Mrs. Raybult gave a startled quiver. Then she sank into a chair and covered her face with her hands. The others in the room looked at one another. Was the answer going to be yes or no? Nancy had a strong hunch that it should be yes, but that as soon as Mrs. Raybult recovered from the shock of Nancy's unexpected question, she would say no. Finally, the woman raised her head. She did not have the look of a grief-stricken widow. Instead, she glared balefully at Nancy. "This girl is crazy," she said. "Another one of those meddling teenagers. Why doesn't she stay out of other people's business? Of course I haven't heard from Felix. How could I? He's dead. I tell you, he's dead." Mrs. Raybult's voice had risen to a high pitch. Captain Johnson asked a sergeant to take Mrs. Raybult to her car, but requested that the girls remain. After the woman had gone, the officer asked Nancy what had prompted her question. The girl detective smiled. "I'm sure that many other people think Mr. Raybult is alive. He has the reputation of having cheated people, including poor Mr. Swenson. Talk is going around that he felt it best to disappear. But wouldn't he get in touch with his wife?" The police captain looked at Nancy in astonishment. "You are a very clear thinker," he said. "The theory that Mr. Raybult is alive is being worked on. Hospitals, airlines, railroad companies, steamship companies, all have been questioned. No clues have come up yet." Nancy thanked the officer for the information, then said, "I hope Mr. Raybult will be found, and when he is, that he will clear Mr. Swenson of any blame in connection with the fire." The officer did not reply. Nancy turned to Bess and George. "I think we'd better leave now." When they reached the sidewalk, George said, "Wow, what a session! Where do we go from here?" "Home," Bess replied. "What a day this has been." "Do you insist?" Nancy asked. Bess eyed her chum intently. What's on your mind? I was wondering if Mr. Weston could help us clear Joe Swinson, Nancy replied. Do you mind driving back to Stanford with me so I can talk to him? Let's do it, Bess urged. Anything to help dear little Honey's father. I agree, said George. Nancy slid into the driver's seat and took the main street which led toward the highway to Stanford. As the car passed one Mapleton store after another, Bess kept gazing at the window displays. Finally, she asked Nancy to stop. I want to run in and buy a new dress for Honey, she said. I'll come with you and get her some underwear, George spoke up. Nancy chuckled. I'll follow and pick up some shoes for her. First, I'll phone Mr. Weston. If he can see us, I'll call home and tell Hannah to notify your families. The friends alighted, and Nancy hastened into a drugstore to make the telephone calls. Then she went to a children's shoe store. When she rejoined the cousins back at the car, the girls showed one another their purchases. They're lovely, said Nancy. These things should make Honey very happy. Glad you thought of it, Bess. Mr. Weston will see us, so let's go. They reached the impressive Weston home about 6:30. Both the manufacturer and his wife were amazed to hear of the arrest of Joe Swinson, known as Joe Dahl. Even in the short time Dahl has been working for us, he has become a very valuable man in our organization, the plant owner said. On my desk is a recommendation from the manager for a promotion. Then if he's cleared of this charge against him, said Nancy, you'll take him back? Yes, indeed. The young sleuth gave Mr. Weston a warm smile in appreciation, then said, I wonder if you or your factory manager can give us any information that might help to exonerate Mr. Swinson. The manufacturer thought for several seconds, then shook his head. He arose, went to the telephone, and called his plant manager. There was a lengthy conversation, then Mr. Weston came back to report. I'm afraid we haven't any clues to help you, but my manager feels certain Mr. Dahl, that is, Swinson, would never resort to seeking revenge on an enemy. He is a highly ethical person. I'd be glad to defend him in this way. I'll pass the word along, Nancy said. Thank you so much. She arose to leave. At once, Mrs. Weston insisted that the girls remain to dinner, an invitation which her husband heartily seconded. We wouldn't think of your driving back to River Heights without first having something to eat, he declared. The girls were persuaded to stay. The 4-course dinner was perfectly served by a butler. Mr. and Mrs. Weston were charmingly informal, and conversation took on a less serious tone. Soon after dinner, the girls said goodbye to the manufacturer and his wife. And headed for River Heights. After taking her friends to their homes, Nancy continued to her own residence. She was surprised to see a family car, a familiar car, standing at the curb. Ned must be here, she thought. I wonder if he has any news for me. She met the young man on the porch as he was leaving the house. Nancy, what luck! He exclaimed with evident pleasure. I was afraid you weren't coming. Any news? Nancy inquired hopefully. Ned shook his head regretfully. I guess I'm not very good as a detective. I haven't been able to learn anything of value. I just drove over thinking you might like to go to a movie with me. I've already seen one today, Nancy said, and I've had all sorts of adventures, so if you don't mind, I'd rather stay here and talk. I have a lot to tell you. The suggestion was not displeasing to Ned, for he had mentioned the show merely as an excuse to spend the evening with Nancy. You look tired, he said sympathetically. I shouldn't have come tonight. I'm glad you did, Nancy told him quickly. There's something I particularly want you to do for me. At your service. Nancy then recounted to the astounded young man all that had happened at Stanford and Mapleton. Since you live in Mapleton, it will be easy for you to see Joe Swinson, she concluded. I wish you'd go to the jail and talk with him. Try to cheer him up. You bet your life I'll go, Ned assured her promptly. Anything more I can do? Well, tomorrow you might drive over to Sandy Creek and take some packages to Honey. She indicated the gifts now lying on the hall table. I'd go myself, only I want to concentrate on finding Mr. Raybould. I'll be glad to go. I sure feel sorry for those folks. Tell you what, suppose I take both of them, Mrs. Swinson and Honey, to see Joe. That should cheer him up a little. Ned and Nancy discussed the mystery of Felix Raybould's strange disappearance, and Ned was of the opinion, too, that Raybould's wife might know more than she was telling. It was his conviction that Raybould had gone into hiding for some nefarious reason. Seeing that Nancy was very weary, Ned cut his visit shorter than he had intended. When he left her, it was with the promise that he would do all in his power to help her locate Felix Raybould. Nancy did not retire immediately. She noticed that a light was burning in her father's study, and she decided to tell him her suspicions. He was buried deep in a law book, but he looked up and smiled as his daughter perched herself on the arm of his chair. "Nancy, you look worried," he observed. "I hope this new case of yours isn't getting me down." "I'm worried about Joe Swenson," she explained. "What do you think of his chances, Dad?" "If the account on tonight's newscast is correct, I'm of the opinion he'll be convicted, unless Felix Raybould shows up." "That's what I want to talk to you about. I'm sure Mr. Raybould must be hiding somewhere." "And I agree," her father said. "Nancy, I obtained one bit of information today that might prove this. I thought you might track it down for me." End of chapter 16. Let me see what time I need to pick up Keegan, because I'm not sure. Ugh, I can't type. Lioness, of course. They won't see Riddy before it's too late. If they don't see me, it's great. Oh, Riddy, I'm not hyperventilating. You're hyperventilating. Okay, I'm fine. Those teenagers. Those meddling kids. Ow. Those teens listening to their rap music that goes, "Homework's whack and so are rules, tucking in your shirts for fools." CJ! Oh, the Ned hate is real. I think I'm gonna at least try to go one more chapter. Or maybe this... I don't know, there's not much of the book left. 174. Maybe I should stop here. I don't really want to stop, but... because I'd rather just, like, finish the book. But I may have to go get Keegan. I don't know. I'll try to at least... we'll go another chapter and see what Keegan says. We're pretty close to finishing the book, so... okay, chapter 17, An Important Clue. Nancy could hardly wait for her father to proceed. She left the arm of his chair and seated herself on a couch opposite him. "As you recall," the lawyer began, "I mentioned that Felix Raybould practically had stolen my client's invention, an improvement for an automatic elevator." Nancy leaned forward, listening intently as her father continued. "Mr. Simpson also feels that Raybould may have decided matters were getting too hot for him and he'd better disappear. The other day, Mr. Simpson's wife happened to stop at a country store and gas station a few miles outside of Mapleton. A run-down old car with a shabby-looking driver was just pulling away. Mrs. Simpson had only a fleeting glimpse of the man, but she thinks he may have been Mr. Raybould." "How exciting!" Nancy exclaimed. "Did she follow him?" "No, but she asked the attendant about him. The man's bought a large quantity of canned goods, including bread in tins." "Bread in tins?" "Which makes it appear," said Nancy, "that the man was going camping." "Exactly. Of course he may not have been Mr. Raybould. The clerks in the store said the shabby-looking customer was a stranger to them, but I think the clue is worth investigating. Oh, I agree. The man might have been Mr. Raybould in disguise, said Nancy eagerly. I'll get right to it and start by going to that store first thing tomorrow morning. But not without Bess and George, Mr. Drew insisted. Nancy called the cousins at once. Both were enthusiastic about accompanying the girl detective, although Bess, as usual, said she hoped there would be no danger involved. Oh, by the way, Ned was here, Nancy told her. He's going to deliver our gifts to Honey, then take her and her mother to see Mr. Swenson. Good, Bess giggled. I see you're starting this friendship with Ned correctly. Make your date work for you. She hung up before Nancy could retort. The following morning, the girls drove to the country store, made a few purchases, then asked if the stranger in the old car had ever come back. No, he never did, but he had no reason to, one of the clerks said. The tank of that old crate was full to the brim, and there was enough food in the back seat to last the guy a month. Which way did he go? Nancy asked. The man pointed in a direction opposite to the one where the burned Raybould home was located. After Nancy had received a full description of the old car, she followed the road it had taken. Presently, she said, Girls, if you were coming along here and planning to hide, where would you go? If I knew about that cobwebby cabin we saw, I'd go there, George replied. But we were in it after Mr. Raybould's disappearance, Nancy spoke up. Nobody has been in it for a long time. Bess, what's your guess? Another cabin, one that's closer. Maybe Mr. Raybould has a small hunting lodge somewhere. Nancy was driving very slowly now. Finally, she said she was looking for a little used side road. If there were tire tracks on it, she would see where they led. Suddenly, Nancy stopped. On her left was a narrow, grassy lane, almost obscured by overhanging trees. There were 2 distinct tire tracks. You're not going to drive in there, Bess cried out. Nancy, you'd ruin your car. I guess you're right, Nancy conceded, but I think we should investigate. She parked, locked the ignition, and climbed out. The other girls followed. The woods road was rutty and full of stones. I hope we don't have to go far, said Bess presently. These stones hurt my feet. We should have worn hiking boots. Nancy forged ahead. The road went on with no sign of a cabin, or the shabby car, or its owner. After the girls had walked for 15 minutes, Bess called for a rest period. They dropped to the ground. It's certainly quiet in here, George remarked. You could hear a pin. Oh! All 3 girls were startled by the distant buzz of a chainsaw. As they listened, there came a tremendous crash. Timber! Exclaimed George, grinning. You're a little late with your warning. The tree's already fallen, Bess chided her cousin good-naturedly. Well, I'm sure Mr. Raybould isn't doing any lumbering if he's trying to hide, so let's go back. Nancy felt that they were not a long way from the tree-cutting site. Whoever is working there may have seen Mr. Raybould or his old car. Let's find out, she said. As the girls plodded on over the rough ground, the sounds of trees being felled grew louder. Finally, they came to a spot where they could see a good distance ahead. A large area of the woods was being cleared for housing development. They assumed that the entrance to it was at the far end, for in the distance they could see several new houses. There's a man who looks as if he might be the foreman, Nancy said, and walked toward a tall, husky young man. She introduced herself, then asked him if the lane was used by the real estate developers. No, that's on someone else's property, he replied. My name's Tim Murphy. I'm in charge of the clearing operation. Are you looking for someone? Yes, a shabbily dressed man who has an ancient hot rod, Nancy grinned. We thought he might be staying in a shack in these woods. Tim Murphy's reply startled the girls. I think your friend was here, but left mysteriously. This development has been held up, and we just resumed work a couple of days ago. There's a little shack not far from here. It was empty, so whenever we had a downpour, my men and I used it for shelter. 2 days ago we went there. What a surprise we got. A man came out with a shotgun and ordered us away. He was tall and thin, and his clothes were very shabby. Was there a car around? George asked. Yes, a black crate that sure was beat up. Think this is the man you're looking for? Yes, said Bess, but if he has a shotgun, we're not going near him. Tim Murphy laughed. You needn't worry, he's gone. This revelation shattered Nancy's hope that her quest was nearing an end. When did he leave? During the night, and he hasn't come back. I have an idea he won't either. I got the impression he wanted to be alone, and an expanding housing development is no place for a recluse. Say, do you mind telling me why you girls are interested in such a peculiar guy? They were spared the necessity of answering Murphy when a worker called him away. He went off hurriedly, and the girls started back to the lane. They were silent until they came to the spot where they had rested before. Do you think the man with the shotgun really was Mr. Rabel? George asked Nancy. The young sleuth shrugged. Your guess is as good as mine. One thing is sure, whoever he was, the man acted as if he were guilty of something and didn't want strangers around. Which makes me think, said Bess, that he is Rabel. Nancy, we must give up trying to find him before he uses that shotgun on us. I might agree, Nancy replied, if we were certain, but our evidence is pretty slim. For the sake of the Swensons, I want to capture Mr. Rabel before he can leave the country. I'm convinced now that he and his wife are in collusion. They're just waiting to collect his life insurance, which is probably large, and the fire insurance. Then they'll meet in some foreign place. George chuckled. You know, it would serve that old cheat right if his wife collected the money and never met him. He couldn't do a thing about it without being caught. Bess nodded in agreement, and I wouldn't put it past that woman to play such a trick. When the girls reached the end of the lane, Bess announced that she thought they should have lunch before doing any more sleuthing. All right, Nancy agreed. Laughing, she added, how about the Mapleton Inn? And have Mrs. Rabel bring the police to arrest you, Bess protested with a giggle. Nancy had noticed an attractive roadside restaurant on the outskirts of town and drove to it. As the girls ate, they discussed their next move. I'd like to call on Mr. Swenson, said Nancy, and ask him if there's anything else in the diary that might be damaging evidence against Mr. Rabel. It was 3 o'clock before the girls arrived at headquarters. When Nancy made her request to the sergeant in charge of prisoners, she was told that Mr. Swenson had just been brought to one of the waiting rooms. His kid came to see him, the officer explained, and we didn't want her to see him behind bars. We told Honey that her dad had to stay with us for a while. His wife's there too. Are you special friends of theirs? Yes. Okay then. The sergeant called another officer who took the girls into the waiting room. A policeman stood watching. At once, Honey bounded into Nancy's arms. See, I have all my new clothes, she said proudly. Mr. and Mrs. Swenson seemed very glad to see the visitors. The couple smiled pathetically, and it was evident that Mrs. Swenson had spent a good deal of time crying. Her eyes were swollen and red. She looked pale and weary, as though she had slept little. Your kind friend Ned Nickerson brought Honey and me here. He will come back for us in an hour. Joe Swenson looked haggard and worried. He brightened somewhat when Nancy told him that Baylor Weston was not only keeping his position at the factory for him, but that a promotion awaited the inventor. You're the only one who can help us, Mrs. Swenson said tearfully to Nancy. We haven't enough money to engage a lawyer, and we have no well-to-do friends. If the case actually comes to trial, I know my father will defend Mr. Swenson without a fee, Nancy assured her. However, I'm hopeful that we'll prove your husband's innocence before that time. The book you have may help, Mr. Swenson said guardedly. Nancy nodded. She knew he meant the diary. It was still in her purse. She told herself, I'll have the rest of it translated at once. The girls remained a few minutes longer, then departed, realizing that the little family wished to be alone. When they reached the street, Nancy told her friends, If Mr. Peterson's well enough, I'm going to see if he will read the diary. Let's go to a phone and find out. End of chapter 7. Blech. Oh, I guess you guys are not here, but thank you to Terry and Riddy for being here, as always. And, Keegan has not answered me. This is not as easy as I thought it would be. I'm glad I'm doing a test. Yeah. Well, let me know if you need me to do anything, or if you need any help. I mean, I can't really help you because I'm not there in person, but you know what I mean. I have ballet tonight, but I'll be around for a little bit before I have to leave. Okay. Just kind of letting Keegan know what is happening. So, I will continue with the book and see if we can't finish it. Okay, chapter 18. A revealing translation. There was an outdoor telephone booth at the entrance to a parking lot next to police headquarters. Nancy entered it and dialed the number of the Peterson bakery. To her delight, she learned that her old friend was home from the hospital and would be glad to see her. When George heard this, she said, "You're running a shuttle service between River Heights and Mapleton." Bess giggled. "With side trips to Stanford and Sandy Creek." "Don't plan on staying home long," Nancy warned them. "I may need you tonight." "Tonight?" Bess exclaimed. "I was counting on giving myself a shampoo and—" "Whatever it is," George interrupted. "The Swenson-Raybolt mystery is more important." "Well, I'll stick by you, Nancy." "And I will, of course," Bess declared. "But please get this mystery solved soon so I can catch up on a few things." "Like what?" George asked. "Well, I postponed a nice date 3 times already," Bess said. "I was to go out with Jeff Allen tonight, but I'll put it off again. Nancy, where will we be going?" Nancy said this would depend on what she learned from the diary. When the girls reached River Heights, Nancy dropped off Bess and George at their homes, then drove to the Peterson bakery. She learned from the counter clerk that the owner was upstairs in his apartment, and the woman showed Nancy the stairway to the 2nd floor. The elderly convalescent was seated in an armchair and apologized for not rising to greet Nancy. She smiled, saying, "Mr. Peterson, it's wonderful to see you again, and how glad I am you're feeling better." "Thank you, Nancy." "Why, you're a young lady now," he laughed. "I remember you as a little girl, always objecting to the ribbons Mrs. Gruen put in your hair. You especially liked my Swedish fruit tarts." Said Nancy, smiling in recollection. "I can almost taste the lingonberry ones now. They were my favorite. Well, Mr. Peterson, I've come to ask a favor of you. Would you translate a Swedish diary for me?" "It would give me great pleasure. I'm very much interested in diaries. Many secrets of history have been unraveled by diaries that were uncovered some time after the writer's deaths." "I never realized that," said Nancy. "In many cases, this is true of the personal journals the famous people kept," the baker explained. "Take Queen Victoria of England, for instance. Pictures of her and the complicated politics she was forced to play make her seem like a very stern old lady, but she left a diary telling of her life as a young queen and mother of small children that gives a very different idea to her. She was gay, loved to dance and give very elegant parties." "How interesting." "I already knew that because I'm obsessed with Queen Victoria." Then, of course, there were other diaries set down by great men of history. For example, George Washington's well-kept account of his life. One section tells of a journey from Washington to Philadelphia, which took 5 days. He also told of a gift of mules to him from General Lafayette for his farm. One of the most important diaries was that of Christopher Columbus, who kept a record of his entire journey from Palos in Spain to our continent. "Did you know, Nancy, that when he saw the shores of Cuba, he thought it was Japan?" Nancy laughed. "I guess the old mariners made some amazing mistakes." "What is more amazing is how they managed to get back home," said Mr. Peterson. "Some of the voyages must have seemed endless. I enjoyed reading about a schoolmaster who took a job as a private tutor with a family that was moving from Scotland to Virginia. It was a 3-month voyage, and all he received for tutoring the children was bed, board, washing, and £5 for the entire time." How things have changed, Nancy remarked. This is such a weird, random tangent. She had listened in rapt attention to his recital of items in the old journals. Nancy wondered if Joe Swenson's up-to-date diary would prove to be as revealing about the writer's inner thoughts. A tingle of excitement came over her as she took the diary from her purse and handed it to Mr. Peterson. The baker glanced through it before starting to read aloud. "The writer of this journal is an inventor, I see," he commented. "It's not a day-by-day account. Apparently he put down only the most important events." Mr. Peterson began to translate. Much of what had been written was delightful and informative, but had no bearing on the Braybolt case. After a while, Nancy interrupted to say, "If you're becoming tired, please stop. I'll come back another time." "Don't you worry, Nancy. I feel fine." He read on. "Today," the diarist had written, "I went to see a man who sells inventions to big companies and shares the royalties with the inventors. His name is Braybolt. Tomorrow I shall take him my drawings and typed instructions for the electrochemical process and machine, which will put a special ceramic finish on steel to resist high temperatures." Mr. Peterson turned the page and translated a description of the meeting, during which Mr. Swenson had handed over everything to Felix Braybolt. He had been given a check for $500, and the verbal promise of a 50-50 royalty split in the future. "Mr. Braybolt," Mr. Peterson translated, "is a very shrewd man. He confided to me that he didn't keep all his important papers and money in bank safe deposit boxes. He has a secret hiding place in his house known to no one but himself. Just a minute," Nancy cried out. "Please translate that part again about the secret hiding place." To herself she added, "Maybe that's what Mr. Swenson meant when he said the book you have may help." Mr. Peterson complied with Nancy's request, then looked up and smiled. "You see a mystery here?" "Indeed I do, and one that ought to be solved. Did you know that Mr. Braybolt's house burned to the ground, and he has disappeared? "I hadn't heard," the baker replied. "But then, I do not know this Felix Braybolt. Shall I read further?" "Oh, please do." Mr. Peterson went on. There were many references to the invention, with some technical language about how the machine and the chemicals work to produce the desired finish on metals. "This is proof without a doubt that the invention is Mr. Swenson's," Nancy thought excitedly. She listened carefully. The diary came to an end without any mention of a contract between the two men. Nancy was elated. Joe Swenson had a good case against Felix Braybolt. She was eager to talk over the whole matter with her father. "Mr. Peterson," she said, taking the diary, "you've been a tremendous help in this mixed-up mystery. Thank you very much." "I'm glad to have been of assistance," the baker replied. "The reading was most enjoyable. This writer of the diary is well educated and clever," Mr. Peterson smiled, "but he doesn't sound like a very good businessman. I presume that's why he's in some kind of trouble." "That's exactly it," Nancy answered. And we have an illustration. It says, "Please translate that part again about the secret hiding place," Nancy asked. It's also cute. I like the old guy. "And you'll get him out of the trouble," the baker said. He chuckled. "I just can't believe the little girl who loved cookies is now a detective." Nancy laughed, shook Mr. Peterson's hand fervently, and took her departure. Wishing to see her father at once, she went directly to his office. Mr. Drew was about to leave, to be gone until later that evening. "I can see you for about 5 minutes, Nancy," the lawyer said. His daughter told Mr. Drew as quickly as possible what she had learned, and he agreed that the inventor had a good chance of winning his case, if Mr. Braybolt could be found. "So far the police haven't a clue to his whereabouts, Nancy. I believe you came nearer to capturing him than anyone else has. It's too bad he moved out of that cabin. And worse that he has disappeared into thin air," Nancy replied, "but I'm not giving up." "That's the spirit," her father said affectionately. "Well, best of luck, and when you see Mr. Swenson, tell him not to worry." Nancy drove home slowly as she tried to figure out the puzzle. When she reached the house, Hannah Gruen was taking a few minutes' rest and sipping a cup of tea. Nancy joined her and told them the most recent happenings. My goodness, said the housekeeper. You've done several days' work in one. Now you must relax. Nancy hardly touched her own cup of tea. She sat staring into space, and understanding Mrs. Gruen did not interrupt the young sleuth's train of thought. Suddenly, Nancy cried, I've just figured it out. Figured what out? How to trap Felix Raybolt. Okay, end of chapter 18. Oh. Sorry, me and Keegan are figuring out pickup plans. Alright, so we're all good. We have time to finish the book, which is very exciting. How's the pumpkin, CJ? How's it going? Okay, chapter 19, Setting a Trap. What's that? Okay. Wish I had a better way to do this. What are you using? Not that I know anything about pumpkin carving. Okay, Nancy told Hannah Gruen her plan. She believed that Felix Raybolt was hiding somewhere near the ruined estate, perhaps in the dense woods which adjoined the property, and she proposed to watch the place for a return visit. Excuse me. It's said that a criminal always returns to the scene of his crime, she declared, and he has a special reason besides, to get something out of the secret hiding place. Up till now, I understand, police guards have been stationed on the grounds day and night. The special investigators from out of town expected to finish their examination of the ruins today, and the guards would no longer be necessary. What do you plan to do? Mrs. Gruen asked. Bess and George and I will watch for him tonight. We may waste our time, but I have a feeling, I can't explain it, that we'll catch him near the burned house. It sounds risky, Nancy. How about taking a man with you? Dad won't be home to supper. He'll be out for the evening. After a pause, Nancy added, Maybe I can get Ned Nickerson. Please do that. Nancy telephoned Ned's house, but there was no answer. I'll stop there when I get to Mapleton, she told Hannah. When George received Nancy's call, she was intrigued to hear about the secret hiding place where Mr. Raybolt kept valuable papers. Where do you suppose it is? Or was? George asked. If it's still intact, Nancy replied, there's only one spot for a hiding place, behind the stones of the cellar wall. Even if Mr. Raybolt doesn't show up, I'd like to try to find it. So come dressed for some digging. Great, so Nancy is going to trespass now. Nancy made the same request of Bess and added that she would pick her up in 45 minutes. Fine, said Bess. That'll give me time to eat and get dressed. I'll be ready. Finally, the girls were on their way to Mapleton. It's going to be pretty dark tonight, Bess commented. There will be no moon. So much the better, Nancy declared. Mr. Raybolt probably wouldn't venture to return if he thought there would be any danger of his being detected. Your plan sounds dangerous to me, Bess remarked. What if Mr. Raybolt should come and make trouble? We'd be 3-1, Nancy returned. Of course it would be better if we had a man along. I'm going to stop at Ned's house and see if he can come with us. Good. The sun was sinking low when Nancy swung into Mapleton. The girls stopped at the Nickerson residence, which was on their route, but were disappointed to learn that Ned had not returned home after driving Mrs. Swenson and Honey to Sandy Creek. Who knows, maybe he's off hunting for Foxy Felix, Nancy said to her friends. I'll leave a note for him, and if he should get back in time, he might follow us to the estate. She quickly wrote a message and gave it to Ned's mother. Mrs. Nickerson promised to deliver it the moment her son came home. As they drove away from the Nickerson home, Bess said nervously, I have a feeling something dreadful is going to happen tonight. It wouldn't be so bad if there only were other houses close by, but they're so far away. The neighbors wouldn't hear us even if we screamed for help. Calm down, Nancy advised. 3 strong, capable girls like ourselves shouldn't need any help. I'd be I'd be a match for Foxy Felix myself, George boasted. Look at my arm muscles. I assure you I haven't wasted all the time I spend in the gym. Dusk was just settling when the girls came within sight of the burned mansion. The Raybould estate looked unpleasantly lonely. Even George felt less inclined to joke as she realized that within a few moments it would be dark. Nancy drove past the estate and hid the convertible in a dense clump of trees. We'll leave the car here, she said, and go quietly up the driveway. The girls armed themselves with flashlights, a pick, and 2 lightweight shovels. Then they went cautiously along the road and turned into the estate. No one came to challenge them as they reached the ruined house. A few charred beams, which had not fallen to the ground, stood like sentinels, guarding the wreckage. In the dimness, the girls could easily imagine that they were ghostly figures. This is going to be spookier than I figured, Bess chattered nervously. Nancy, you do have the wildest ideas. The girl detective did not reply to this. When she was fairly certain no one else was around, she turned on her flashlight and played it on the stone walls of the house's foundation. Nancy realized it would be a Herculean task to move the debris away to inspect them. Nevertheless, she set the light on a pile of rubble and began to shovel away a heap of plaster. What do you expect to find? George asked, turning on her flashlight and setting it down. And tell me how I can help. A safe, Nancy answered. And how about you girls taking turns with the pick and shovel? The other one act as lookout. Bess posted herself as guard while the others worked. Nancy and George uncovered several feet of wall, but found no loose stones or anything indicating a section to open. The stones were tightly cemented. Suddenly, Bess whispered hoarsely, "Put out the lights! I hear someone coming!" The flashes were clicked off, and the 3 girls crouched down. They could hear nothing now. "I'm sure I wasn't mistaken," Bess said. "I believe we had better quit this work and hide," said Nancy. "If Mr. Raybould is coming, he'll probably be here soon." "Maybe he's the person I heard," Bess whispered. "All the more reason for us to pretend to be leaving in case he's watching us," George spoke up. The girls left the ruins without turning on their lights, stumbling and falling over the debris. They went down the driveway, but before reaching the end, Nancy said, "Let's leave the tools here, go into the woods, and sneak back toward the ruins." They hid the pick and shovels and retraced their steps. Nancy found a place behind a clump of bushes only a short distance from the ruins. The shrubs concealed the girls, yet disclosed a view of the driveway and the woods. Nancy and her friends settled themselves as comfortably as possible, but from the first, insects made it plain that they resented the intrusion. A half-hour passed, then an hour. The girls were startled several times as twigs crackled or dead limbs of trees crashed in the breeze. "The bugs have nearly eaten me up," Bess complained, "and my back feels as though it were broken." "You'll become paralyzed after another hour or so," Nancy grinned. "How long do you propose staying here?" George demanded. "It must be almost midnight now." "It isn't 10 o'clock yet," Nancy laughed. "Well, I don't think Mr. Raybould is coming, or he'd have been here by this time," Bess said sleepily. "Why don't we go home?" "I want to stay a while longer," Nancy returned quietly. Again, the girls became silent. Bess and George, having accustomed themselves to their hiding place, stretched out and left Nancy to keep watch. They were no longer nervous or afraid, only weary of an adventure which had gone stale. Presently, George became very quiet and then fell asleep. Bess's eyes closed too, and soon she was in a deep sleep. How long the cousins slept they had no idea, but suddenly they were awakened by a scream and the sound of running feet on the driveway. "Nancy!" cried George, jumping up. "What's happened?" There was no answer. "Nancy!" called Bess, grabbing George by the arm. Still there was no answer, and the 2 girls realized that their friend was no longer with them. Where was she? Who had screamed? Who was coming up the road in such haste? I have a bunch of tools. The ones I just bought don't work at all because they aren't sharp enough, so I'm disappointed in that. And the sharp ones are hard to use without ruining parts I need intact. Ugh. Yeah, that sounds difficult and frustrating. I don't know what I'd use. Like, kitchen knives, cutlery, I'm not sure. feel bad that you're having to do all the hard parts. It is both difficult and frustrating. I feel bad that I can't help you with this part. I mean, we still have time. It's Tuesday, right? Yeah, because Halloween's Wednesday. Unfortunately, I just won't be around for the weekend, but yeah, there's still a bit of time. Alright, I think this is the last chapter, or maybe there are 2 more chapters. So, yeah, I think this is the last chapter. Kind of a one-person thing by nature. Yeah. But you agree? You agree that I feel bad that you're doing the hard work? Okay, last chapter hype. Chapter 20, A Surprising Victory. Well, no, I agree, I wish you were here. Yeah. I was just giving you a hard time. Okay. Last chapter hype. While the cousins had been asleep, Nancy had taken matters into her own hands. Her mind had been too active for her to feel sleepy. As she watched first the woods, then the driveway, then the burned house, she suddenly became aware of footsteps. Maybe that's Ned, she thought hopefully. The masculine figure was still too far away for Nancy to be able to discern who it could be. While she waited with bated breath, the man paused. She was about to awaken Bess and George when it occurred to her that they might speak aloud and warn the oncoming figure of their presence. As the man turned toward the burned house, Nancy was in a quandary. She did not dare rouse her friends, yet she wanted to follow the intruder. She must find out who he was. Ned, come to help her, an inquisitive neighbor, or Felix Raybould. Leaving her friends, Nancy began to follow the man. Stealthily, she crept nearer the ruins, dodging from tree to tree. She was glad there was no moon, for the darkness afforded protection. When she was only a few feet away from the man, Nancy paused. He turned on a flashlight. This was not Ned Nickerson. From descriptions of the estate owner and from numerous newspaper photographs of him, Nancy felt certain that the tall, thin figure must be Felix Raybould. He was carrying a shovel. Suddenly, he scrambled over the rubble and began to dig vigorously in the cellar wall some distance from where Nancy had been working. So that's where the secret hiding place is, thought the young detective. She watched excitedly as Mr. Raybould uncovered a group of stones in the foundation wall. He removed them, opened the door of a safe beyond, and pulled out a stack of papers. To Nancy's horror, he laid them down and set a match to the sheaf. It's evidence against him, Nancy said to herself. He can't destroy it. Instantly, Nancy sprang forward. She grabbed the shovel and beat out the flames. At the same time, she cried, Mr. Felix Raybould, you can't burn those papers. Nancy, you're stupid. The man had started violently and staggered backward. Nancy caught him by the arm, saying, Why have you been hiding? Almost at once, Mr. Raybould recovered from the shock of the unexpected encounter and jerked himself free. For an instant, he looked at Nancy in blank amazement. A snooper, eh? He sneered. Without warning, he grabbed both his flashlights and her own. He turned and started to run across the grounds. Get out of my way! Mind your own business, he warned. Nancy darted after him, but he definitely had the advantage of being familiar with the area. Her only chance to capture him lay in the possibility of his turning toward the place where she had left Bess and George. She must arouse them. Nancy did not know what Raybould might do if she made an outcry, but she had to take that chance. Help! Help! She screamed. Bess and George, having heard the shrill cries for help and approaching footsteps, were now convinced Nancy had uttered the cries and that she was in danger. Oh, what shall we do? Asked Bess. The screams seemed to come from near the ruins. Shh! George warned. Those footsteps coming up the driveway. Maybe it's someone who can help us. This remark electrified Bess, who turned on her flash and rushed frantically ahead. She was the first to reach two men running up the driveway. "Mr. Drew, Ned Nickerson," the cousins cried in relief. "Where's Nancy?" the men asked together. "We don't know," Bess gasped. We heard her scream over by the ruins." The men dashed past the girls, Ned in the lead. Bess and George started after them. "Help! Help!" came Nancy's scream again, but this time it was nearer. Suddenly, a man's figure burst from a clump of shrubs. Sorry, I thought my phone was ringing. Burst through a clump of shrubs at the bend in the driveway. He saw the approaching group, too late to stop. He could not turn, for Nancy appeared directly behind him. He veered off to the lawn. "Hold on there," Mr. Drew commanded sharply. "Dad!" Nancy cried out, and an instant later she recognized the second figure. "Ned!" Felix Raybolt was easily captured. The appearance of the two men convinced the estate owner that his game was up, and he made little protest as they led him to Carson Drew's sedan. "Nancy, you girls had better come with us," Mr. Drew suggested. "You can return and pick up your car later." They agreed readily. "Where are you taking me?" Raybolt muttered as he got into the sedan. "To jail," Mr. Drew told him tersely. "To jail?" the prisoner shrieked. "I haven't done anything." "Maybe not, but an innocent man is being held there in connection with your disappearance. You must exonerate Joe Swenson at once from having had anything to do with your absence or with the fire." "Swenson?" echoed the captured man. "He..." Raybolt broke off and slumped down in the seat. He looked sick and beaten. His face was grimy and unshaved, and his clothing torn and stained. "How in the world did you and Dad get here at the psychological moment?" Nancy asked Ned. "What a weird question!" "That's what it literally says. How did you and Dad get here at the psychological moment?" "Well, I'd been gone from home since morning," Ned explained. "This evening I drove to River Heights to see you. Miss Groom told me you had gone to Mapleton and said she thought I was with you. I telephoned Mother from your house and she gave me your message." Okay. Right? It was weird. Mr. Drew added, "I returned home just as Ned was leaving. When I heard what you were doing, I decided I'd better come along." At the jail, Foxy Felix did not even appear to be flustered about the situation. When questioned by the officials, he admitted that he had had an appointment with Joe Swenson, but said that he had been outside the house at the time of the explosion. "Isn't it true that you had explosives illegally stored in your cellar?" Nancy asked him. Raybolt nodded. He claimed the explosion and fire had been accidental. When asked about his disappearance, he gave an evasive explanation. He said that he had been stunned at first, then had staggered off into the woods. "And vanished," said Carson Drew. "You carry heavy life and fire insurance, I presume, Mr. Raybolt. Your wife could have collected the money and met you later in some faraway place." The telltale flush on Raybolt's face told the lawyer that Nancy's and his supposition had probably hit its mark, but Raybolt confessed nothing. They judged that Mapleton had become too unfriendly a place for Foxy Felix. His enemies were numerous, and he no doubt lived in constant fear of physical harm. The fire had given him an opportunity to slip away quietly. "Guess we can't hold him," the captain told the Drews. "This clears Swenson beyond a doubt. Sorry we arrested him, Miss Drew, but you must admit the evidence pointed his way." Joe Swenson was brought into the room. He was overjoyed about being freed, and at first could scarcely believe the good news. Tears came to his eyes as he thanked Nancy and her friends for all they had done. "It's a shame that Felix Raybolt can't be held," Nancy said. "Isn't there any charge to keep him here?" "I'm afraid not," her father returned. "Everyone knows the man has swindled people, including my client, but we have no proof. We need papers, letters." Suddenly, Nancy grabbed her father's arm. "I may be able to produce them," she said excitedly, and told about the papers which Raybolt had tried to burn but she had managed to save. "Excellent," said Mr. Drew, as Bess, George, and Ned gasped in astonishment. We'll go out there at once with an officer if Captain Johnson agrees." The captain called the lieutenant and said that the man would accompany them to the burned estate. Mr. Raybolt, he added, would have to remain at headquarters to await the arrival of the papers. The others hurried outside and drove off in the squad car. When they reached the ruins, Nancy pointed out the exact location of the safe. The police lieutenant quickly gathered up the records that Rabel had started to burn, also some papers which the officer found in the safe. When the Drews and their friends reached headquarters, they were amazed to find that Mrs. Rabel had arrived. She was admonishing her husband not to admit anything. Captain Johnson handed the papers to Mr. Drew. "Please look at these," he requested. "If they have any bearing on this case." Felix Rabel jumped from his chair. "Don't read them. I admit I paid small sums to inventors and promised royalties I never sent, though I sold their ideas for large amounts. I'll give restitution to every one of them." "Felix, Felix!" his wife screamed. "Don't give in!" She glared at Nancy. "Oh, look at all the trouble you've caused!" Rabel appeared not to hear her. "I'll pay everyone, even if it takes my last cent. I'll do anything if only you won't send me to prison." "Don't do it! Don't do it!" Mrs. Rabel pleaded. "We'll be ruined!" "We'll be ruined if I don't," her husband muttered, "because I'll have to go to jail." Mrs. Rabel sank into a chair, covered her face with her hands, and began to sob. For an instant, Nancy felt sorry for her, then changed her mind as the woman burst out. "We had the whole thing so well planned, no loopholes. Then this Nancy Drew has to come along and spoil our lives." Nancy, her father, their friends, and the police captain looked at Mrs. Rabel in astonishment. The officer leaned forward and asked, "Are you admitting that you and your husband planned this whole unscrupulous plot?" "Keep quiet," Rabel stormed. But the damage had been done. Little by little, a full confession was obtained from the husband and wife about the plot they had devised to pile up a fortune from insurance, then vanish. Rabel finally admitted that he had rigged up a television set on the first floor to trigger the explosion by remote control. He had planned that it would go off when Joe Swenson arrived for the appointment. "But Swenson was 20 minutes early," Mr. Rabel growled, "so I had to go ahead and cause the explosion without getting the papers out of the safe. I knew I could come back later for them." Further questioning proved that Mrs. Rabel was responsible for having the two detectives track down the inventor and put the blame on him. At the end of the session, everyone in the room showed complete disgust for the Rabels. All their conniving at the expense of other people, Nancy thought. Both the Rabels were held. They were allowed to telephone for legal counsel, but even before the lawyer arrived, the husband asked for a checkbook from Mrs. Rabel's purse and wrote out a check for several $1,000s to the order of Joe Swenson. "If you'll look among those papers Nancy Drew saved," the estate owner said, "you'll find one that's a receipt for the sale of his invention to the Streeter Corporation." Mr. Drew looked at the receipt and commented that the amount of the check was $500 less than the sum on the receipt. "I received $500 from Mr. Rabel in cash," Joe Swenson spoke up. Then, without smiling, he added, "Thank you, Mr. Rabel, for this check." Mr. Drew, meanwhile, had continued looking through the papers Nancy had rescued. He frowned angrily, but said nothing until he came to a bulging envelope which he opened. "These are the plans stolen from my client, Mr. Simpson," he remarked. "I will take them, Mr. Rabel. And, Captain Johnson, I think you had better keep the rest of these papers to see that the other inventors are properly reimbursed." "I'll certainly see that they are," the officer declared. All the visitors but the Rabels left headquarters. Ned offered to take the still-stunned Joe Swenson home in order to break the good news to his wife. Honey, of course, would be asleep. "Suppose you come to dinner at our house tomorrow for a victory celebration, all of you," Nancy invited. "Ned, could you—" "Yes, I'll gladly drive the Swensons over," he said. Bess chortled, "We wouldn't miss it for the world," and George nodded vigorously. The following day was an exceedingly happy one at the Drew home. The Swensons wore broad grins, and Honey's mother said, "We all our happiness to you, Nancy." "I think you owe it to the fact that your husband dropped the diary," Nancy said, smiling. "Yes," said George. "If it hadn't been for the clue Nancy found in it, she never could have located the owner and helped bring you all together." As the gala dinner ended, Mr. Swenson mentioned that Baylor Weston was promoting him to a responsible position in the experimental division of the factory at a large salary. "That's marvelous," said Nancy. "You've been so kind to us," Mrs. Swenson spoke up, "that we want to show our appreciation in a more material way." She presented each of the girls with a tissue-wrapped package. "It isn't much," she said apologetically. "Indeed it is," Nancy cried, unwrapping a beautiful purse. As she opened it, the girl detective found a note inside. The message read, "Will you please keep my signet ring to remind you of your adventure and of our deep gratitude for all you have done for us, Joe Swenson." "I'd love to, of course," Nancy said, a little catch in her throat. "The ring has meant a great deal to you. Now it will to me." Bess and George likewise received purses and Ned a wallet. They thanked the donors heartily. A short time later, the inventor and his family left, after promising to call frequently on Nancy and her father. The young detective felt a glow of pleasure, as always when she made lasting friends of people she had helped. But she did not know in what strange way this would occur soon again. Much to her amazement, in her next adventure, Nancy's mysterious letter, she was to help someone with a name like her own who was in great trouble. "It really was a gorgeous party," Bess sighed blissfully. "Such fun." "Say," said Ned, "I have a notion to start a diary of my own." "Why don't you?" Nancy asked lightly. She became conscious that Ned's eyes were looking straight at her. "I will if I can fill most of the pages with entries of dates with you." Nancy evaded the question. "I enjoyed your help in solving the Swenson mystery. Maybe we'll soon find another one we can work on together." The end. The end of The Clue in the Diary. I hate when they say the name of the book like it's a thing. I know, it's pretty cheesy. It's just very much of that time period. Yes, Nancy, avoid the question like the plague. Alright, I have to go get Keegan, so this is where I will end the stream. But thank you all for being here. Thank you, CJ, for coming in and staying to the end. And we will discuss pumpkins later. Hooray for finishing. I will figure out what's next on the Nancy Drew reading list. The next stream will be Monday. Should be Monday. Okay. Should be Monday, 2 p.m.-ish. Well, okay, I say that. I have an appointment, but I'm planning on getting it changed, so should be Monday, 2 p.m. Thank you, Joni. Thanks for being here. It's good to see you. I hope you all have a great weekend, and next week's Halloween, so that's exciting. Yeah, and thank you all for being here. I already said that. Okay. I'll see you guys later. Bye.